Oh, hey, what's going on, party people? My name is Robert Jenkins. I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural edition of the North Star podcast. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that when it comes to trying to convince people of something or trying to put a product out in front of people, is that what you really want to do is start with why. Don't start with what the product is. Don't start with the benefits and how cool it is and how much the person needs. It starts with why. Why do you make the product? Why are you doing what you are doing? And so that's how I'm going to start this introductory episode here. I'm going to start it with why. Why the North Star podcast? Well, if you're like me, maybe you feel like we, black people, but Americans in general, but black people in specific, have gotten lost somehow on our way to freedom. The reason I say that is because if you look at, for example, our marriages, if you look at our children, our academic and social economic standing, just in general, if you look at the performance level of African Americans overall, you'll notice, and it's indisputable, that we have declined in almost every metric since the 1965 Civil Rights Movement. I guess it culminated in 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Ever since 1964, we have been on a noticeable declination in all of our indicators that would tell whether or not African Americans are being successful. Now, the interesting thing, some people say that's due to a legacy of slavery. Well, that's not due to a legacy of slavery. And there's one way to know that, and that is because immediately after slavery in 1865, from 1865 up until 1965, we were on an incline. Our trajectory was generally headed in a positive direction. And in fact, we were moving upward further and faster than our white counterparts were at the time. For example, if you look at the Census Bureau statistics, you'll notice that from 1865 on up until about 1940, I think it was, black people in this country had higher rates of two-parent households. And in many cases, many of those years, we had a higher rate of two-parent households than white America did. Source on that is any of Thomas Sowell's books. You can also just look at the Census Bureau data for yourself. So how is it that right after slavery, from 1865 on up to about 1940, 50, we had more two-parent households than white America, but then starting in about the late 50s and the early 1960s, that trend started to reverse itself, and we became a percentage of the population with a declining rate of two-parent households. Now, I know the popular culture tries to tell us that it doesn't matter if you have two parents or not, but the simple fact is statistics tell you that it does matter if you have two parents or not. If you don't have a father in the house, for example, you are much more likely to go to prison. You're much more likely to drop out of high school. You are much more likely to experiment with drugs. Kids are much more likely to become sexually active early on. Females are much more likely to get pregnant early when you come from households that don't have two parents, which is another way of saying you don't have a daddy in the house, a father in the house. So how did we incline, how are we rapidly increasing immediately after slavery, but then starting around 1960s, rapid decline to the point now where I think it's something like 74% of our households are headed by female only, by moms who are doing an admirable job. They're doing the best they can, but it takes two parents to raise a child. And hopefully that's not some controversial statement. So that's one of the ways that we've declined. It's one of the reasons why I'm making this podcast. So, and I want to specify at the outset here that everything that I say and do is predicated on the belief that black people are better and can do better, and that we, again, have somehow lost our way. And it's not that I'm saying that I have the way forward. It's not that I'm saying I know the answer to all of these myriad problems that the black community may face. It's that I'm saying that I'm a man of some experience in life, and I hope to share anything that I have that may be available to help somebody may be there to help you think. Some of my strong points is I think I'm reasonably intelligent and I'm pretty well read. The other thing is, like I said, I'm coming at this from a perspective of love, and although stern love. I'm a father. I have 2 children, so I'm coming at this the same way I would come at them. I'm not coming at this with that accept any excuse kind of love. I'm coming at this with a you can and will do better type of love, because I know you can do better. So why aren't we doing better? That's where I'm coming from with this. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not, like I said, it's not an ego thing. It's a frustration thing. We're in 2019 here as I record this, and I don't think there's anybody out there who can seriously argue that somehow racism as an impediment to black people is worse today than it was in 1865 or 1965 for that matter. 1975. The point I'm making is that things have steadily improved in this country in almost every respect you can name. The economy is up and down. It's actually down now, and that's maybe news if you get your economic indicators from the nightly news or something like that from mainstream media. We'll touch on that in a later episode. But I'm starting with why here. I'm very disappointed and upset about the things that I see around my community and, in a general sense, in my country. America is potentially the greatest country on this planet. And I think that African Americans, black people, I don't like to say African Americans. I don't know why I keep saying it. Black people are some of the most exceptional people in this country. Then again, we're some of the most unexceptional people in this country. And I want to encourage us by all means necessary to be exceptional, to be as exceptional as we as individuals can be. I'm talking about individuals here. I'm not talking about this vague concept of a community. The simple fact is we're all individuals. And when people start talking in terms of community, they're talking in ways that they can do. They're doing that's a trick they play to control you and corral you. You ever heard that saying, you can't herd cats? You can herd sheep, but it's very difficult to herd cats because cats are independent minded. If you herd sheep, you get a few leaders and like Judas goats or whatever, and have that sheep lead the rest of the sheep, and they go in a specific direction with almost no goading or no outside prodding, or very little outside influence. Cats, on the other hand, do what they want to do because they're individuals. You can't make them all herd in one direction and do all one thing. I think that's the proper attitude for human beings to assume. You know what I'm saying? The proper attitude for human beings as soon as I'm an individual creature of God, and I got to do what my conscience leads me to do. I got to raise my family the way I think they should be raised. I got to do the job that I feel that I'm best at doing. In other words, I got to stand on my own 2 feet. So I'm very much a staunch individualist. I don't get down with any kind of collectivism or any concept of owing some allegiance to anybody other than my family and my friends and my loved ones and those who show allegiance to me. So the why of this podcast is to, with love and hopefully with some sound reasoning and some experience and some good judgment, maybe, talk about things that I see. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do in this podcast, I want to stay away from politics, overtly talking about politics, because politics really is the art and science of gaining and maintaining power through elected office, as taught at the historically black college I went to, Wiley College, Texas and Federal Constitution class. I still recall the textbook there. Politics is the art and science of gaining and maintaining power through elected office. Now, if you really want to get real, politics is the art and science of gaining and maintaining power over people and their lives by gaining and maintaining public office. So I'm not interested in politics because I'm not interested in gaining and maintaining power over anyone. In fact, I'm not interested in anyone gaining and maintaining power over me and my family. And I'm diametrically opposed to people I don't know having undue influence over me and my family. And I realize that, like I said, as an individual, as a man, head of my household, as a father, as a loving husband, these decisions that are left to me and my wife and my children, how we want our household to run. It's not something that is going to be fixed by putting somebody in the office who talks a good game. So I'm trying to deal with principles over politics here. Why? Because I want to improve our lives. And I think politics has been a net detrimental force in the lives of black people, especially because we're wedded to one particular party, the Democrat Party in particular. Like I said, I'm not wedded to either party. In fact, I think they're both full of it. I think they're both two sides of the same coin, to be honest with you. Nothing ever changes because they're both part of the establishment. So it doesn't matter when you put a conservative in or a liberal, so-called Democrat, so-called Republican. You notice if you're smart, if you're astute and you observe closely, you'll notice that things don't really change much despite who's in office. Well, that's because it's not designed to change. That's why I think we have to look at principles over politics. Another thing that I'm strongly interested in, why I'm doing this podcast, is because I want to discuss what some of those principles are, and those principles are something that I think a lot of black people are not familiar with, and that is the political philosophy of libertarianism. Libertarianism is simply a philosophy that states, at its core, it says that it is not lawful for anyone to initiate violence against another person. Now, violence doesn't just mean punching somebody in the face or shooting them or stabbing them. It's violence, or the threat of violence is something that the government does to us all the time. And that's what politics is, the government's game, getting you to vote for people and put people in office so that they can use violence or the threat of violence over you to make you do what they want to do. Now that's a little deep. I don't want to get too deep. I'm just trying to give you a taste here. This is called Starting with Why. But these are some of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. I'm also doing this podcast because I'm a poet. I consider myself primarily a poet, even though I haven't written anything for a while, seriously. I haven't been doing the spoken word thing for a while. But this podcast will be my excuse to get back into that poetry. It's a goading, a prompting to get back into that poetry. So when you tune in, you're going to get some poetry from me. I hope to have several poets around the area here, the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. I know a few poets around here, and I'm going to try to have those people on the show and let them spit some verses. Let them talk about how they came to poetry and what it means to them and why they do it. So that's another reason why, because poetry it's observations on the beauty and ugliness of life. And I think it's instrumental to understanding ourselves and understanding the world around us. It's also freedom of expression. And again, this is the North Star podcast. It's all about freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom, financial freedom, health freedom. So that's what we're going to be doing on this podcast. This podcast is in some ways directed towards African Americans, but then again, not. Because to be frank and honest with you, I'm getting tired and fed up with the whole concept of race and color. And before I go any further, I want to say, I'm not saying I'm not proud to be who I am. I'm a black man. That's who I am. I wouldn't actually change anything about it. In fact, I'm glad I have had the fortune to grow up and experience life as the person that I am. Got a black wife, black children, come from a black family. So it's not a question of not loving my race or not loving myself. It's a question of realizing that race and color and gender are things that we have no control over. And I've found through just living that the things that bring me the most pleasure and the greatest feeling of accomplishment and worth are things that I have worked to achieve. And things that people have helped me work to achieve. You don't do everything by yourself. So when I say individualism, don't get it twisted like I'm saying everybody's an island. No man is an island. John Donne, I think, said that. What I'm saying is the things that I'm proudest of is that I'm a good dad. Things I'm proudest of is that I have a side business doing videography, and I'm pretty good at it. And I'm struggling all the time to get better and better and better. One of the things I'm proud of is that I read a lot, and I've taken time to cultivate my mind. I'm not super intelligent. I'm not super well read. There's some people out there that just blow your socks off, and I've had the pleasure of meeting many people like that in my life that are just so head and shoulders above me and anybody else I know in intelligence that it makes you feel really humble. But I'm proud that I've taken steps to cultivate myself. There's things that I'm not proud of. But the things that I'm most proud of and the things that most define who I am in life have nothing to do with my gender or my color. Those were accidents of birth that I had nothing to do with. So why would I base my anything in life on placing any importance on that stuff that it was basically just a lottery? It had nothing to do with me. So that's what I mean when I say I'm getting tired of race and color. What I'm trying to do is encourage people to move forward with the things that they can be proud of, that they have accomplished: skills, knowledge, achievements, status, rank, that type of thing. So that's why this podcast. That's why the North Star podcast. Just to share some tidbits of libertarian philosophy mixed with life experience and some of the intellectual endeavors that I've had over the years, reading books and different experiences. A little bit about me: I'm a native Texan. I currently reside in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Retired military. I was Air Force for about 21 years. I was a linguist in the Air Force. Learned about 3 different languages. Served some pretty interesting stuff, most of which I can't talk about. But I will try to distill lessons from some of that experience. I just can't go directly into it because, well, certain things you ain't supposed to talk about. Starting with why. I feel like we have gone astray and we have gotten lost on our way to freedom as a people, as a group of people in the United States, but also as a group of people called Americans. And I'm trying to do whatever I can to make sure that I keep my eye on the prize. And if it is so that my eye is actually on the prize or some part of the prize, or if I'm heading in generally the right direction, I want to be able to say, hey guys, check it out. Look over here. And that's the reason for this podcast. It's not based on self-hatred. There, you know what? There's some black, conservative black people out there and commentators and pundits, and they get a lot of flack, and people call them Uncle Toms and coons and that kind of stuff. They use a lot of derogatory language toward these people. And I find that it's really unfortunate because it's like, really? Somebody has a difference of opinion on how we should do things or how we should look at things, and they have to be called racial names. The other thing that's unfortunate about that is, what if these people are right? Now, I will say that some of these other commentators get called those names, I think, because it's the way they are perceived and how they portray their message. And some of them come across as being angry at black people, or overly willing to expose black people's shortcomings, or overly willing to point the finger at black people. I'm not interested in any of that stuff. I am solely interested in, first and foremost, keeping myself and my family on track with our heads pointed towards the North Star, towards freedom. That's what the North Star podcast, the North Star symbolizes. That's I'm first and foremost concerned with, keeping my head pointed that direction and my family heading in that direction. And if I may be of assistance to someone else through this podcast to help them see the right direction for them, then that is something that I will be happy to serve in. So that's what it's all about. And it's all about intellectual curiosity and giving vent to some of the things I think about and don't ever have the ability to talk about with people, because frankly, there's very few people I know that kind of get down with libertarianism that are also black. And that's weird too, because one of the things I'm going to talk about in this podcast is how black people are naturally conservative people. If you look at, we're judging each other as individuals, but if you look as a whole at the group of individuals that makes up the African American community, we are largely conservative people. We're religious people. We are strongly bound by tradition and by the ancestors, the ways of our ancestors and forefathers. That's all conservative. And y'all know what the difference between a conservative and a liberal is, right? It's kind of funny, but it's 100% true. The difference between a conservative and a liberal is this. If a liberal is out walking one day, out hiking, and they're out in this remote area, and this is a story you might have heard, say this liberal's out in the middle of nowhere hiking, he comes upon this open field and this big tree, woody area, and he comes out and there's a open field. In the middle of that field, he sees a fence. Out in the middle of nowhere, there's a fence running through the field. The liberal will come up on it and say, well, that's stupid. Who put a fence out here? Let's tear it down. On the other hand, the conservative will, in the same circumstances, out hiking in the middle of nowhere, come out of the forest into a clearing and see a fence. A conservative will look at that fence and say, Somebody put a fence way out here in the middle of nowhere. Must be a reason for that. I think I'm gonna leave it alone till I determine otherwise. And plus, it ain't on my property, so yeah, best bet is to leave it alone. That's kind of a humorous illustration of the differences in mindset sets or perspectives, but I think it's, in general terms, it's pretty accurate. So you can't be a people who respect the past and respect the ancestors and the ways of their elders and respect the religion of their ancestors, and who were once slaves and therefore know the true meaning of the ability to own private property. Because the first and most important form of private property is yourself. Surely that should resonate with black people. And so that's why I think it's a natural fit for black people to be conservative. Why aren't we? Well, that's a topic for later discussion now, ain't it? And hopefully you guys will tune in with me here on the North Star Podcast. Again, my name is Robert Jenkins, and this is the inaugural episode, and I was trying to start with why. Why am I doing this? I think to put the bottom line up front, which actually is not the bottom line up front, it's really like the bottom line at the end. So to leave the bottom line at the bottom, I'm doing this out of love and a desire to express myself and hopefully help someone in the process. And if anything good comes out of it, then so be it. If anything bad comes out of it, it's all on me. So I guess with that, I have started with why. And having said all that, I guess I want to bid you guys 2 digits.